Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Seattle is in the throes of a stunning and unprecedented affordable housing and homelessness crisis. Seattle needs rent control. Our city has been the construction crane capital of the nation for 4 years running. Construction has been booming. The for-profit construction boom has resulted in the perversion wherein working families who want to live in Seattle are forced out due to unaffordable rents, while the city's apartments have a 10% vacancy rate. The for-profit market, dominated by real estate speculators, corporate developers, and big landlords, has failed us. The logic of the for-profit market implies that it is more profitable for the capitalist class to have rental apartments vacant for extended periods than to bring rents down such that they are affordable to working people. The Mandatory Housing Affordability Program, or the MHA program, which has been much touted by the Democrats on the City Council, generates a small number of affordable homes through allowing for-profit developers to increase the height of buildings in return for providing some affordability. Every new affordable home is important. I have supported the MHA program. But because MHA relies on what is acceptable to big business, the amount of affordability eked out is sparse. There is to date no accounting of the existing affordable homes that are being lost as we speak as a result of the demolitions and renovations with or without MHA. Upzoning and increased density is necessary in order to expand urban housing and increase sustainability, but upzoning in itself, even through MHA, is obviously not going to make a dent in the serious housing crisis. There is a strong agreement among working people throughout the city that the political establishment has failed to address this crisis. As the housing crisis worsens and the city's political establishment gets increasingly called out for it, even the Seattle Times had to openly acknowledge that under a for-profit regime, quote, rents are never going to plummet back to the days when you could get a sweet spot on Capitol Hill for $1,000 a month. It might be wishful thinking to hope for rents to drop more than a little, since that virtually never happens, unquote. As long as housing is a commodity for making eye-popping profits for the bosses, the capitalists, the housing crisis will never be solved and will be exacerbated. We need a bold and comprehensive approach to matching the scale of the problem, a policy program that puts people over profit. We need rent control. We need a massive expansion of social housing funded by taxing Amazon and other big businesses. In response to grassroots organizing on rent control in the 1970s, the real estate lobby, with the loyalty of both the Democratic and Republican parties, succeeded in passing a statewide ban on residential rent control in 1981, which banned cities like Seattle from carrying out rent control. The Democratic Party currently has a majority in both the state House and Senate, along with the governor's mansion. Yet, they did not even propose to lift the ban on rent control this legislative session. There is nothing blocking the state government from lifting that ban today, except that the Democratic establishment is beholden to corporate real estate interests. We cannot wait for the Democratic politicians in Olympia to act and keep giving Seattle's Democratic establishment that perennial excuse for inaction. That is why my office and our movement for housing justice is putting forward a proposed ordinance for a comprehensive citywide rent control ordinance free of corporate loopholes that would take effect the moment the statewide ban on rent regulation is lifted. Building a fighting movement to win rent control in Seattle this year, effective the moment the state ban is repealed, will put immense pressure on Olympia to repeal the ban. We saw the momentum that rent control got in 2015 when Councilmember Nick Licata and I debated against the right wing. That same year, my office put forward a resolution urging the state legislature to lift the ban. That 2015 resolution was voted for unanimously by the then City Council. Just last week, the City of Seattle Renters Commission, some of whose members are here with us today in personal capacity, voted to, quote, urge the City Council take action in line with their 2015 resolution supporting a repeal of the statewide rent control ban by passing an ordinance within the next 3 months to implement rent control in Seattle, effective whenever that state ban is lifted, unquote. In other words, the City of Seattle Renters Commission is exactly on the same page as my office and our movement. We want to tell the City Council they will no longer be able to pass the buck. This will also clarify what our movement means by rent control, but we will need to build a serious fighting movement to win this. We know the Oregon state just passed rent control. As we speak, renters and housing activists in Colorado are fighting to push the state legislature to repeal the ban. We are not alone. My office also joins the City of Seattle Renters Commission in demanding that the City Council require landlords to provide a 180-day notice for any rent increase. My office will be looking into this idea and potentially bringing forward an ordinance, and I thank all members of the Renters Commission for showing such important leadership in the face of this crisis. Please, I wanted to also draw your attention to our one-pager on rent control. I would urge the media and everybody who's here to look at this because it has some of the basic ideas that we will be bringing forward. If you turn on the flip side, we have a summary of what that policy would be. It would be a policy that was free of corporate loopholes. So in other words, one, the rent may not increase any more than the rate of inflation. We will be joining cities like Los Angeles, which already have such a policy in place. The effective date would be moment the state ban is lifted. All residential rental homes will be covered. In other words, no loopholes. If you're renting a space in a single-family home, if you're renting a condominium, if you're renting an apartment in a rental apartment building, no matter what, rent control should apply. We also want a rent control policy that is free of yet another loophole. The loophole is called Vacancy Decontrol. In other words, our policy will have vacancy control. What does this mean? It means that all rental homes will remain rent controlled between tenants and do not go back to market rate rents when a tenant moves out. This has been a common loophole. This has been a common loophole that the real estate lobby has viciously fought for and won in many cities. In fact, in California, a very destructive policy that was put forward at the state level by Democrats and Republicans called the Costa-Hawkins Act. Costa was a Democrat, Hawkins was a Republican. They included this loophole. We want to make sure that loophole is not in place because we want to make sure everybody has access to rent control and that you don't have to be one of the lucky few who has access to a rent-controlled apartment. We also demand that there be one-to-one replacement. In other words, redevelopment must replace demolished rent-controlled homes at rent-controlled rates. I will talk about next steps in a moment, but I wanted to invite the diverse array of speakers we have today to show how deep the support there is for rent control in our society, in our city. To begin with, I would love to invite Stuart Strader, who is a Capitol Hill renter, a tenant at the Kenton Building on North Capitol Hill, and a member of the Milestone Tenants Fight Back. Please welcome Stuart.
Yeah, hello, I'm Stuart Strader. I am a Kenton apartment tenant and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm proud to stand here this morning with Kshama Sawant and the community allies to declare that it's time for rent control in Seattle. The building we live in on Capitol Hill was bought by Milestone Properties, a $65 million real estate company. They immediately tried to jack up our rents on some of us by as much as 69%. But my neighbors and I organized and fought back. We forced them to take $200 off the rent increase and delay it by 2 months. And we're still demanding that they raise rents by no more than 10%. They thought they could get away with gouging us with super high rents, and Milestone isn't unique. The housing market is all about making super profits for the few, not affordable housing for the many. That's why we want to join with you to do citywide what we were doing in our one building. By organizing and fighting together, renters and workers in Seattle could win rent control and put it on the agenda statewide. With Bernie Sanders running for president, it's possible to build a nationwide movement for rent control, for taxing billionaires to build public housing, and to take millions of foreclosed homes back from bailed out banks.
Thank you, Stuart. I also wanted to share with everybody that alongside our fight for this rent control ordinance that would go in effect as soon as the state ban is lifted, we are also fighting for the Economic Evictions Assistance Ordinance, which under current law is completely legal, but it will need a political backbone to fight for. Because what it says, and please look at this handout and make sure, can we make sure all members of the media have access to this handout? This says that the relocation assistance program would be expanded to everybody who is renting but gets pushed out because their rent went up. So the bill would do the following. It would make sure that any renter who is requiring to move out of their rental home because their rent went up by 10% or more in a year, and if that household made up to 80% of the area median income, then the renter will receive 3 times the rent from the landlord. Does this sound like a good idea to us? Yes. As I said, the Economic Evictions Assistance Ordinance is completely legal under current law. And as we build our movement for the rent control ordinance, we will also, alongside that, build the momentum for economic evictions. And our movement will be asking every city council member, when we talk about rent control, you say it's not legal. But what about economic evictions assistance? That's completely legal. Will you be voting yes on this ordinance? On that note, I wanted to invite a very important speaker, Maru Mora, who is a fighter for immigrant rights, a founder of La Resistencia, and who has taken her own personal crisis and shown that when you fight collectively, you can win. Please welcome Maru.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Maru Mora Villalpando. I'm an undocumented immigrant. I lived in Seattle for many years, and I had to move. I'm trying to come back, and that's just impossible. I'm really honored to be here with so many community allies and with Kshama. I think it's time for rent control. This is due for so many years. People like me, low-income immigrants, are expected to serve the wealthy by working here, yet we're not allowed to live in this city because it's completely unaffordable. We also hear again and again from city officials that this is a sanctuary city. How can it be a sanctuary city where we're not even allowed to live in the city? This is nothing but hypocrisy. We are here in Seattle because ICE is here in Seattle. ICE is everywhere taking our families away. My job is half time here in Seattle and half in Tacoma. Yet I'm not allowed to live in Seattle, and I have to commute many hours, and it's very expensive for people like me. People like me that don't have social security numbers are not even allowed to apply for a possibility of a low-income housing. I think that in general, this city has allowed for these skyrocketing rates on rent to be created. It created an environment where people like us, low-income, undocumented immigrants, and immigrants with documents are just not allowed to live in the city. We believe that the absence of the rent control is a racist measure. It's a racist control measure to ensure that low-income people of color are not allowed in the city. We believe this is time, and the time is for rent control now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maru. Next, we have Violet Lavitai, Executive Director of the Tenants Union of Washington State and a longtime fighter for tenants' rights. Please welcome Violet.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I have been a housing advocate for many years now, and we support Kshama Sawant in the fight for rent control. Rent control will help more than 1 million renters across the state. We have to at some point say, how do we keep people in their homes? And these rent increases are outrageous, where it's evicting people and putting them on the street. Today, we are starting the work for rent control, and we support council members who push the envelopes, who are bold to say, how do we bring rent control in our state, in our city, and how do we help people who are being displaced at this very minute? How do we keep them in their place? Because of rent increases, it plays into displacement, gentrification, and homelessness. So today, as a member of the tenants union has been fighting for rent control since the 80s. And we want to today declare that we want to fight to repeal rent control. That way, everybody has a chance to say, I can pay my rent. 30% of my income can pay the rent. As we all know, a lot of us are paying more than our share of rent. And so if you're a homeowner, that's great. But there's a lot of us who are not homeowners, and I also too am a renter. So today, we support Kshama Sawant, and we're gonna fight for rent control. Thank you.
Violet and the tenants union have also consistently made the very important point that the people who are affected disproportionately by Seattle's unaffordability and homelessness crisis are our communities of color, our immigrant communities, and many women of color. So it is very important for us to take this fight seriously. The other voice we have heard about the unaffordability crisis is from union members who make better wages than non-unionized workers, but are also facing the brunt of this crisis. And so to talk about that, we have Matt Maley, a Seattle public school educator, member of Seattle Education Association, and also a member of Socialist Alternative.
Thank you. Like Kshama said, my name is Matt Maley. I'm a member of the Seattle Education Association and the Socialist Alternative, and I am very proud to stand here next to Kshama and everybody in the community to declare that it is time for rent control in Seattle. With average apartment rents of more than $2,000, educators across the district, from librarians, office staff, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, can't afford to live in Seattle. As a substitute, I have spent a lot of time working in District 3, from Lowell Elementary School, which reportedly 20% of students, or 1 student out of every 5, is without permanent housing in 2017. Also, Garfield High School in District 3 is estimated 1 in every 13 students is homeless as of last year. The school that I work at today, the NOVA project, that ratio is closer to the rest of the district, about 1 in every 10 students. In reality, as scary and depressing as these numbers are, the numbers could be underestimates by half. For years, we've been told by state Democrats that they couldn't enact meaningful legislation to help renters until they got majorities in the legislature. But this year, with strong majorities in both the state House and the state Senate, the Democratic Party has failed to put forward a bill to end the state ban on rent control. They are siding with big developers and corporate landlords, and we have to build a movement from the grassroots. I'm committed to build that movement, along with other educators, school workers, and fighting to win Seattle's Economic Evictions Assistance and rent control. We cannot rely on City Hall politicians either. Remember, the majority of City Council voted to repeal the Amazon tax less than a month after passing it unanimously. We cannot wait either for the superintendent or the school board to jump in now and start tackling solutions. We need renter protections, we need high quality, affordable social housing, we need rent control, and we need them now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Next, we have a very important but not often heard voice amongst us. This is Kathy Yasi, childcare provider and a leader in SEIU Local 925, and resident and landlord in the Central District.
Yes, hello. I'm Kathy Yazzie, and my husband and I have lived in the Central District of Seattle for 32 years. We raised our family here, we own our home, and we also own 2 rentals. As a dues-paying member of my union, SEIU 925, I am really proud to stand here this morning with Councilmember Kshama Sawant and community allies and declare that it is time for rent control in Seattle. I love Seattle and the enormous creative spirit that exists here. And I love the hardworking people and the cultural, social, and economic diversity that fill our city. As a longtime Central District resident, I have seen devastation, though, because there are no limits to what landlords can charge. I had a really sweet elderly neighbor, lived just 2 houses down from me, and he was recently forced from his home because he couldn't pay his rent increases. Also, many young families, as a child care provider, I am in touch with many young families, and they can't find affordable places to live within a reasonable commute to their work. As a small landlord, I fully support rent control, and I know that protecting tenants from economic eviction is absolutely essential to preserving the Seattle that I love.
Thank you, Kathy, for reminding us that the real estate lobby does not speak for all landlords. I invite other small landlords who are watching this and feel the same commitment to social justice and housing affordability to join our movement. Please contact my office. Next, I would welcome Adam Capillo, who is a University of Washington graduate student worker in the mathematics department, a member and rank and file organizer at UAW Local 4121, the union that includes 5,500 academic student workers at the University of Washington.
My union, the UAW 4121, we are researchers, teaching assistants, postdocs, graders, and tutors. And we are proud to stand here today with Councilmember Kshama Sawant and community allies and declare that it is time for rent control in Seattle. On average, our union members pay 44% of their pay to the landlord. That means that people are scraping by. Many of my friends are foregoing healthcare or other essentials because the rent takes so much of our paycheck. My roommate and I pay more than half of our salary in rent, and most months we barely manage to scrape by net zero. So we are calling on other union members and all workers to build solidarity, to build this movement and win rent control and get protection from the greedy corporate landlords in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. We now have Wale Ogundipe, a tech worker and a member of the Seattle chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America.
I'm speaking first in a personal capacity, but I am the co-chair of Seattle Democratic Socialists of America. That's for Seattle and King County. And with that being said, I look forward to the work being done in the Tacoma chapter of the DSA and momentum they're making with the coalition groups like the Tiki Tenants and the Tacoma Tenants Organizing Committee, as they were fighting hard to extend the 3-day pay or vacate to 14 days for all of Washington's renters within the state legislature. But today, we're proud to say that we're not stopping there and are setting our sights on repealing the ban on rent control in Washington state. The time is now. The entire region is experiencing a crisis. We cannot afford to wait. We hope that Washington state Democrats, who now have a legislative majority and the governor's mansion, will meet these demands of the poor, the working class, and that will help uplift the most vulnerable in Seattle.
Thank you, Wale. We now have Gina Owens, longtime renter in Seattle, longtime fighter for social justice in Seattle, and member of the City of Seattle Renters Commission, speaking here in personal capacity. Please warmly welcome Gina. In the meanwhile, while we locate Gina again, let me invite Shirley Henderson, who's the owner of the Squirrel Chops coffee shop in the Central District.
My name is Shirley Henderson, and as Kshama said, I'm the owner of Squirrel Chops in the Central District at 23rd and Union. And I am so proud to stand with all of these fighting allies and with Councilmember Sawant to declare that it is absolutely, without a doubt, time for rent control. Having lived in Seattle myself for many years now, and many of those years on Capitol Hill, I'm intimately acquainted with our affordability crisis. It's really sad to see how rising rents have forced so many working people out of our neighborhoods and out of our city, my partner and I included. And it's not just residents experiencing this economic displacement. We've also seen the same thing happen to countless small businesses, especially LGBTQ, immigrant, women, and minority-owned places, which is why I also support rent control for commercial rent control along with residential rent control. Landlord and developer profits should not take priority over the needs of our small businesses, of renters, and workers in this city. We need rent control, and we need it now. And as so many have said, it's not just a whimsical idea, it is a necessity for survival of so many of us. I'm proud to stand with everyone here this morning as a part of a movement to demand that Seattle City Council pass rent control and call on Democrats in Olympia to finally overturn the decades-long undemocratic ban on rent control.
I wanted to urge the small business owners who are watching this, if you are also hurting writing your rent check for commercial rent to your landlord, then you should join our movement. Now it's time for Gina Owens, longtime renter in Seattle, longtime fighter for social justice in Seattle, and member of the City of Seattle Renters Commission, who's speaking here in personal capacity. Gina.
Is Kshama a champion of our city? Hello, everybody. I'm Gina Owens. I'm an 18-year advocate for housing and rental issues in Seattle and across our state. Because I've worked long and hard on these issues, I've just recently been appointed to the Seattle's Renters Commission. Thank you. However, today, I am not here as a commissioner. I'm here as an individual renter of our city and county who is disillusioned every time I hear yet another story where a renter is being taken advantage of. My mission in activism is to ensure fairness is at the heart of all of our policies. Policies like the ban on rent control are not fair to renters, and I'm only one of tens of thousands of people in our city of Seattle who want to see it banned. We cannot have policies that cater to only elite and privileged. Our policies must be written and enforced for all of our residents. A repeal of the ban on rent control would mean all renters would have the opportunity to choose where they want to live. It would mean landlords cannot just increase rents anytime they want. People would be more stable, knowing their rent will not change overnight. But Seattle cannot wait for state legislature to repeal it, can they? We have to start the movement here and now. So I'm here today to support everyone that's standing behind me and Kshama Sawant. We are fighting for Seattle rent control law without corporate loopholes. I agree with our District 3 City Council member, Kshama Sawant. We do need to build this movement, and we need to start right now today. All of us putting our hands in the pot, we can win this. We can fight this and we can win. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And last but not least, before we announce our next steps, we have the Reverend Angela Ying, Senior Pastor at the Bethany United Church of Christ on Beacon Hill.
Today is a good day. Today is a very good day. Because I have hope that we will enact in this city a citywide rent control. It is unconscionable that the wonderful, amazing city of Seattle does not have rent control. It is unconscionable when other metropolitan cities do. And we do not want to be the last one that doesn't. Today is a good day because I'm hopeful and inspired by all of us as we move to have rent control here in this amazing city of Seattle. I can give you example after example of people in my community, in my church, in my congregation who day after day have to move out of their apartments in the last few months because of the rent increases. Every week, without exception, I hear neighbors and renters who meet with me and tell me their stories, how they work hard, long hours, taking care of their children, their grandchildren, their disabled, their elderly parents, and yet need assistance because of the continued rent increases. So let Seattle do the right thing. Let's not be the last metropolitan city to not have rent control. The consequences are too large in not having rent control that affects the most vulnerable. People are forced into homelessness. People are forced into human trafficking. There are huge consequences. But today, let it be known, is a good day. It's a good day because Seattle will move towards enacting citywide rent control as soon as our state legislature lifts up the statewide ban on rent control and does the right thing. Seattle, let's do the right thing. Rent control and economic evictions assistance, because we need to help the vulnerable. That's who we are. All human beings deserve housing, a very basic need. We all win when we have rent control. We all win. Thank you.
Rent control, make Seattle affordable. Rent control, make Seattle affordable.
Rent control, make Seattle affordable.
I wanted to quickly outline the very important next steps that we have planned, because we know that we are going to be met with a vicious fight back by the corporate real estate lobby and big business and the politicians that support them. So we need to ready ourselves. But before I go into that, I wanted to recognize not only all the speakers who spoke, and thank you very much, but also the people who are here and the organizations that are represented. I wanted to recognize K.L. Shannon, who had to leave, but who represents the NAACP and the labor movement. Thank you. I also wanted to recognize Saro Farah, who was one of the tenants who fought for the law that we won in early 2016, the law that says that landlords cannot increase rents in substandard rental homes. I also wanted to recognize Devin Silvernail, who leads Be Seattle, who has been conducting the many successful renters' rights boot camps alongside my office, and who's also part of the Renters Commission, and who has been part of the leadership to demand that Seattle pass this kind of rent control law. I also want to recognize Warren, Rizal, and Renee, who are all fighters of the Chateau apartment building fight, who are fighting their developer. And Juan Bocanegra from El Comité, and all the members of Socialist Alternative who have been part of leading every struggle that we have been involved in. So now comes the real work, right? Are we ready to get down to it? So here are the steps that we are outlining. We're going to launch an online campaign where we will have renters, individual renters, and you don't need to be a big name. You just need to be a renter who's struggling to pay rent in our city, to tell your rent hike story. We will be launching a petition in addition to that, both online and paper, and we invite small businesses throughout our city, like Squirrel Chops, that support rent control, residential and commercial rent control, to have paper copies at their business so that their customers can sign them every day. The petition will demand that the City Council pass this rent control bill and the Economic Evictions Protections measure. We will also organize public speak-outs of renters through my committee and through building a citywide movement. We will urge the Democratic legislative districts and labor union locals to pass resolutions in their organizations to build rank and file support for these two ordinances. And my office will also be hosting neighborhood meetings where renters can talk to me and my staff directly to answer their questions. And I also wanted to draw your attention to this very important frequently asked questions, FAQ, because we know there are many, many myths about rent control. And this is nothing new. Remember when we were fighting for $15 an hour, they said, oh my God, all the business is going to collapse, everything is going to end. They say the same things about rent control. And we need to engage in tens of thousands of conversations with ordinary people who need rent control, but are constantly hearing from the corporate media that rent control doesn't work. Well, it does work. We have seen it work, and let's make sure we share the truth with all of them. Thank everybody for coming here, and I'm also open to any questions that the media might have. Thank you very much.
So the rent control ban hasn't passed before. What's different about this current movement?
Sorry?
What's different about this current movement than the previous ones? Because the rent control ban is still in effect, clearly.
The rent control ban is still in effect because the Democratic and Republican politicians in Olympia have failed to show leadership on an absolutely urgent issue. I mean, look at the front page of the Seattle Times today. The article says that, you know, it is not about drug addiction, it's about rents and it's about unaffordability. And this is a two-time Olympic medal winner who is facing who's facing homelessness. So there is a crisis that's facing the vast majority of our people, and the politicians have ignored this crisis. So we have two choices. One, just sit on our hands and expect that someday in the distant future, the Democratic establishment will gather the courage to break from the real estate lobby and finally stand with us. We've done that kind of waiting for 40 years. Too long, right? Or we can begin the fight here. Absolutely.
If you control, like at the rate of inflation, then how are some properties that are older or need renovations, how are they supposed to be paid for? Because sometimes, like, monies need to go to pay to make sure you don't have substandard housing.
Well, if you look at the examples of rent control throughout the world, the best examples of rent control, they show that an increase in rent at the rate of inflation, no more than the rate of inflation, actually allows enough for operations and maintenance. And in reality, as the Sightline Institute has recently pointed out in a very insightful article, all developers and actually owners of property can actually survive and thrive even at a 2% return rate. But what they say is that what's the hope of getting for-profit developers and property owners to stay at 2%? There's no hope of relying on their good conscience, because what they want to make is not decent money. They want lots and lots and lots of money by exploiting renters. And that is why we need rent control. But at the same time, we have to be clear, rent control is one part of a very important policy program, a bold program. We also need a massive expansion of social housing, which is publicly owned affordable housing, so that we are not held till the end of time. We are not held hostage to this idea that you cannot have affordable housing for your children because this developer wants to make millions of dollars in profit. And we have to fund that affordable housing, social housing, by taxing big businesses like Amazon. The majority of this council shamefully repealed the tax that we fought for last year. But you know what? Despite that setback, that same year, last November, 3 cities in California won a similar tax on big business to fund housing. Mountain View won a Google tax. Seattle can win an Amazon tax.
Why are you the only one here? Where is your council people at?
I think that's a question, the question, why am I the only council member here? That's a question best directed to every elected official in City Hall. Why is it that every year in the last 5 years, we have heard more rhetoric about affordable housing and the problems of homelessness and very little action? Why is that? Because either you have politicians like Jenny Durkin who outright take money from big business. She got $350,000 from Amazon alone for her campaign. Or even if those politicians don't take money from big business, they feel that their priority, their job as an elected official is to try and build consensus with politicians who are never going to agree with us without a movement. And they say, you need 5 votes. Well, we've got 9 votes for everything that we have won, and we have won numerous victories. So we have forced those same council members who are not here today to vote yes on our policies. But the way we did that was not having conversations in the back rooms, but by building a movement in the streets and in our workplaces.
Can you win this fight?
Whether we can win this fight or not, that question has the same answer that, when the question was facing, can we win $15 an hour? Can we win a move-in fee cap and payment plan? Can we win the law that says landlords cannot increase rents when they have substandard homes? Can we win the protection for the affordable homes for working class people at the Halcyon community? Can we prevent the shadow residents from being evicted from the Central District? Can we make sure that the Kenton apartment building on Capitol Hill don't face 70% rates? The answer to all these questions is the same. Can we build a movement that is powerful enough to overcome the influence of big business in City Hall? And I invite the media to ask all council members and the mayor. Let's maybe talk about rent control in a few weeks. Do you support the Economic Evictions Assistance Ordinance? Because there is no legal barrier to that. So you have no excuse to say, well, the state ban. No, there is no state ban on economic evictions assistance. We could pass it next Monday if they agreed with us. But we know, nonetheless, we know the tentacles that the real estate lobby has on this City Hall. That is why we have no option but to build a fight back. And you know what? We are excited. Any other questions? I'm grateful for all the media for covering this very important issue. Regardless of whether your viewers consider themselves socialists or not, I know statistically speaking, most people who are watching your show are hurting when they write their rent check. So they will appreciate the fight that is starting now for citywide rent control. Thank you.